Ukraine struck Russia with likely the biggest attack with drones in the war so far. Among the targets are several airfields. It's unclear yet to which degree the damage was done, but it might have been significant. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia exchanged prisoners of war once again. 205 soldiers from each side were released to the other one. Among the Ukrainians freed were defenders from Mariupol, so soldiers who who became prisoners of war 3 years ago. Then, unfortunately, or at least while they might have been 3 years in prison, they are the lucky ones, because once again, video evidence shows that Russians have once more killed prisoners of war after they've been hors de combat right at the front line. The Russians also did more drone strikes against Ukraine. In one strike, they used 116 drones and the Ukrainians managed to shoot down 63. That's a 46% success rate, the biggest I can remember in a long time. But at the same time, there were reports that Shahid drones were used in the close rear of the front line, for instance, against ammunition depots. That could be an explanation, obviously. It's evident that it's much easier for Ukraine to shoot down a Shahid drone if it flies over Ukrainian territory for 2,000 kilometers rather than it striking something 40, 50, 60 kilometers behind the front line. In another strike, the Russians used 163 drones. 124 of those were intercepted. That's a 9% success rate, actually a little lower than 9%. But so it shows that the success rate is usually below 20%, still though bigger than we've seen before. The Ukrainian strikes against the Russians, on the other hand, have hit some interesting places. We have here films showing that the Kubinka airfield was hit and that there was fire on the airfield and where potentially the planes might be stored. According to claims, this is where the Russians have park the planes for the parade for May 9th. This might actually be a Ukrainian targeted strike in this regard because they knew that the airfields will be full there. At the same time, we have another strike being reported in Kaluga. Here's the Kaluga airfield, and this is supposedly a storage facility where potentially cruise missiles are stored. To which degree this is true and to which degree the strike was successful is also unclear, but we show that a fire happened here at the same time. As you can see, this is the current firms database for Kaluga. So the Ukrainians have struck the Russians, and the Russians said they shot down 524 drones, 5 Neptune, 6 JDAM, as well as 2 HIMARS missiles in the past 24 hours. 524 drones. So this was seemingly the biggest attack we've had so far. We switch to the developments along the front line, and here we start off in Sumy. And actually, we have reports from the Ukrainian attacks into Kursk. I talked about it in the last SITREP. I think that the Ukrainians were crossing into Kursk. We have it now here, a Russian mill blogger saying that the Ukrainians have taken 2 streets in the northwestern part of the settlement of Tetkino. So this would be this would be an indication that the Ukrainians might have taken some territory here. Other than that, no changes that I can report from Sumy and from Kursk. And from Belgorod, we have reports from Russian mill bloggers that fighting is continuing close to Demidovka. That would indicate that the Ukrainians are still inside of Belgorod, to which degree is unclear. If we take the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, they basically confirm that Popovka and Demidovka are liberated by the Russians, but that the Ukrainians still have some presence inside of Russia, and that is confirmed by Russian mill bloggers. That was it from this part of the front line. We switch to Kharkiv, and in Kharkiv we have a change. The Russians have advanced further south in Vovchansk. There was a geolocated attack with an FPV drone on positions under the bridge here, directly southwest of the factory here, of the plant. So this would indicate that the Russians had reached this position and actually took shelter under it, which would indicate that the Ukrainians were pushed back in this area. That's it from Kharkiv. We switch to the Eastern Front. And here we have a change west of Kislivka. Here, the Russians have advanced recently to that point, and the source itself, says it's roughly a month ago. So a month ago, the Russians were reaching more or less this point. To which degree they've gained a foothold is unclear. At least the pro-Ukrainian deep state map does not confirm it yet. That's it north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have changes as well. There was a Russian attempt to break through into Ryhorivka with motorcycles. And the interesting part is it showed the Russians driving this road here while suffering losses, and the last one is being taken out here. Now, we had seen the Russians here and here before. This was a breakthrough attempt with motorcycles, just with high speed racing through, indicating that it might not be held by the Russians, but that the gray zone is probably in this area, because once again, I have no visual evidence of Ukrainians actually being on the ground. And I remind you that Ukrainian observers said that the contested area between two sides is now reaching up to 7 kilometers. All of this, of course, because of the prevalence of drones. Further south, we have the Russians directly north of Verkhnokamiansk. At this point here, right at this point, Russian infantry has been struck by the Ukrainians with FPV drones. So it should be at this point here, indicating once more that at least in this area, the contested area, the gray zone, is significantly further west than the deep state map indicates. Further south, we have the Russians at Chasiv Yar. They have advanced north of it, also a fair amount. We have the Russians here at this point. Now you can look at this pond for reference. This is this one here. This one here should be this one, if I'm not mistaken. So this would mean that the Russians have reached roughly until here over the last few days, indicating that probably this is now a contested area. That was it from this region. We switch to Toretsk, and here we have the Ukrainians doing a counterattack in the northwest of Toretsk. A Ukrainian tank is driving in here and shooting at targets at very close proximity. So this would mean that the Ukrainians were operating here. To which degree, obviously, this changes the situation and the territorial control, I cannot see. So it shows us Ukrainian activity, but not necessarily a change in control on the ground. In Pokrovsk, we have changes, though. The Russians have advanced in Novo-Olenkivka here. We have them here and in the center. And as this here is the northwestern house, we can conclude that it's possible that Novo-Olenkivka has fallen to the Russians. It's a little too early to fully confirm it, but we see that the Russian presence was observed throughout the town, and thus might mean that Novo-Olenkivka has fallen to the Russians. Further west, the Russians have also advanced in Novopoltavka. We had that in the last situation report that the Russians had crossed the road here. Now we have them a little further in Nova Poltavka, where recently they were just in the southernmost houses. Now they have advanced somewhat towards the north. West of it, we have changes as well. The Russians have advanced close to Uspenivka. Not a significant change, but a change nonetheless. We have the Russians advancing up to here, so more or less to this point here is fresh Russian presence that is confirmed. A Ukrainian commander from the front line here is saying that the Russians are driving faster and faster with their motorcycles, also off-road. This is showing that the Russians have started to train their soldiers in using motorcycles, and this is a video that popped up a while ago, which shows us Russian training. I think I've sped it up twice. Yeah. My habit of watching videos faster. So this shows us the training that was published by the Russian Ministry of Defense, where they indicate that they now do proper motorcycle training in avoidance, driving, etc., and apparently also getting them used to being shot at. This would then obviously mean that the drivers are more self-confident and thus can drive faster. On the Front line, we have further changes. Further to the south, we have the Russians advancing in Toretsk. This is up here. We have them in the eastern part of Toretsk geolocated at this point, and further to the south, the Russians have also advanced here north of Rostolny, more or less between Rostolny and Bahatir. The Russians have now reached this point along the road. Further west, in the close to the oblast border, in the rough Velika Novosilka region here, we have the Russians first south of Novosilka. Here, recently, they gained some territory. We have fresh changes here. Now they are on this side of the pond. So here at this point, they've also advanced from further. Here we have them north of Novosilka. We have them further in Vilnepole before they've been here and here. And we have them again in the center of Novosilka. So here, and probably here, which means the contested area is probably extended to this degree here as of now. And a fresh geolocation right before the from today is showing us that the Russians have now advanced further to the west. So they have recently been here. Now they are further west, meaning that they've reached this point here. So we can assume that the Ukrainian presence in here is no longer existent. Otherwise, they would be cut off. That's it from the developments along the front line that I can conserve. We can see, and there we come to some conclusion. When we look at the Ukrainian strikes against Russia, they are very interesting. Ukraine has demonstrated that they can still reach Moscow despite the concentration of Russian air defense. There were some rumors that Russia might have sent hundreds of additional air defense systems into the oblast of Moscow to protect Moscow during the parade. Whether or not to which degree this is true, we have visual evidence of additional air defense that has been deployed. To which degree the numbers are correct, I have no idea. But the Ukrainians have just demonstrated that they can still oversaturate the Russians despite this concentration. This should possibly lead the Russians to send even more, and which will to protect the parade, which would be completely unacceptable to them if the parade has to be scattered because of attacks. But this also means the air defense for Moscow comes from somewhere. It has to be redeployed from other parts of Russia, and thus this will open new opportunities for the Ukrainians to strike targets that otherwise would be too well defended. So we'll have to see what is going to happen in 2 days where Ukraine might strike. In regards to troop generation, we have information here. This is from two majors. So this is a pro-Russian mill blogger. Also an indication where we need to understand the context a little. Now, there is visual evidence of the Russians painting pots black so they look like electronic warfare systems and putting them on their tanks. Now, this could be used for propaganda terms to say to ridicule the Russians. Two majors here explains that there was an order that only vehicles with electronic warfare are allowed to be used, but they didn't have enough electronic warfare. So the soldiers either had nothing to ride on, or they had to walk and thus had to walk on foot, or they had to make the impression they have electronic warfare. So the military police doesn't pull out their vehicles, their trucks, their cars, etc. And this was their interim solution to solve this issue. As said, like this, things like this open an opportunity for propaganda, like for instance, donkeys and horses appearing along the front line, while at the same time we see Russian roads full of cars. That's why I never address the topic of donkeys and horses, because there is a backstory behind it, unless I am aware of what that is. It would be more akin to doing pure propaganda, which I do not want to do here. So in this regard, we actually have the confirmations from the Russians that they painted pots to simulate electronic warfare, but just to fool their own military police, which gave stupid orders, where the military had given stupid orders, which apparently later were rescinded. Then we have something interesting. The Ukrainians have presented a new attack drone, the FP1. It has a range of up to 1,600 kilometers and a warhead of up to 120 kilograms. Now that's quite a nice warhead size already, but the important thing here is what we can also see, up to. Up to clearly means it's not going to fly every time with 120 kilograms. But this allows for the Ukrainians to play around. So we can expect if it is meant to fly 1,600 kilometers, that the warhead might only be 20 or 30 kilograms, simply because it needs less space and thus allows for more fuel. And the weight of the warhead can be used for fuel as well. Whereas if the range is shortened, it can carry up to 120 kilograms. It should not be understood that it will carry 120 kilograms for the full 1,600 kilometers. Other than that, in the political sphere, we have some news. The European Union wants to stop buying any Russian energy at the end of 2027. So far, the European Union is still buying energy from Russia, and in 2024, they actually bought more than they sent in aid to Ukraine. Then we have news from Chechnya. Ramzan Kadyrov has confirmed to media that he is asked for being dismissed as the head of Chechnya, but he said only Putin can do that, and that makes it kind of unlikely because he never groomed a successor, at least not yet. His son Adam is only 17, and that would probably be too much even for the Kadyrovs to put a 17-year-old to run Chechnya. So it's quite possible that this is just once again a political maneuver in some way to rebalance his position, his situation with Putin, as Putin probably has no one else to run Chechnya as successfully in regards to Putin's wishes as Kadyrov does. And this has to be understood in the context that Kadyrov for almost 10 years is again and again toying with retiring. So this is probably a political move. Then we have news from the US. J.D. Vance says Russia is asking too much for the end of the war. Okay, so yeah, I talked about it in the past that the US government and J.D. Vance is one of the most vocal ones in this regard. We're only putting pressure on the Ukrainians and not demanding anything from the Russians. So now we see that the Americans, that J.D. Vance is starting to push somewhat back. And finally, we have news here, and this is interesting because it talks about the FPV nets, that they are getting more and more spread out. And this says that the fishing nets have proven to be the most successful, especially as we can see with bad cameras, they are invisible, which means that for drones will a lot of the time get caught in them, and thus the vehicles are protected. We see the evolution of warfare right in front of our eyes, where now we have basically net tunnels built over resupply routes to protect them from drone strikes. That was it from me for today's situation report. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have something to add. I also made a video about India's strikes against Pakistan. You'll find it here on the channel. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.